There are moments when life appears steady on the surface. Nothing is broken. Days continue to move forward as they always have. Yet somewhere beneath that movement, something feels slightly misaligned. Not loud enough to be called a problem. Not heavy enough to be named as pain. Just a quiet sense that something inside has shifted. Tasks are completed. Conversations happen. Responsibilities are met without resistance. And still, a subtle distance grows between action and meaning. What once felt natural now requires effort. What once brought clarity now feels strangely neutral. Not wrong. Just no longer whole. It is not sadness. It is not fear. It is a pause that arrives without asking permission. In that pause, attention turns inward on its own. Not searching. Not demanding answers. Simply noticing. A faint awareness begins to surface. As if something patient has been waiting beneath the noise. Unmoved by urgency, untouched by distraction. There is no voice announcing itself. No message delivered in certainty. Only a gentle gravity drawing awareness away from the surface of things. This gravity does not pull downward. It pulls inward. Time seems to soften here. Thoughts slow without force. The constant need to explain begins to loosen. Nothing needs to be fixed in this moment. Nothing needs to be decided. Something only needs to be recognized. These moments pass through many lives unnoticed. They are quiet by nature. They do not compete for attention. But when they are felt, they leave a trace. A subtle knowing that something deeper is present. And that what comes next will not begin outside. It will begin with alignment. With attention. With a return to an order that has never been lost. Only temporarily forgotten. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep does not resolve. It does not come from effort alone, nor from lack of rest. It lingers even after pauses, weekends, or moments that should restore energy. This fatigue moves differently. It settles beneath motivation rather than the body. It shows up as a dullness where curiosity once lived. Daily life continues to function. Schedules are followed. Obligations are met. From the outside, nothing appears out of place. Yet internally, something has begun to withdraw. Thoughts feel heavier than before. Decisions take longer, even simple ones. Not because of confusion, but because the inner signal that once guided direction has grown faint. There is less urgency to speak. Silence becomes preferable, not for peace, but for relief. Conversations feel draining, even when they are kind. This is not emotional collapse. It is not despair. It is a slow thinning of inner presence. The mind stays active, but attention feels scattered. Focus drifts more easily. The effort required to remain engaged quietly increases. Many learn to interpret this as personal weakness, as lack of discipline, as a failure to push through. But this fatigue is not created by laziness or resistance. It emerges when the inner life is asked to sustain rhythms that no longer match its truth. Modern existence rewards speed, responsiveness, and constant availability. The nervous system adapts, but the deeper self pays a cost. When attention is continuously pulled outward, when value is measured by output rather than alignment, the inner center begins to thin. There is a loss of nourishment that is difficult to describe. Not hunger, not emptiness, more like a quiet deprivation of meaning. Joy does not disappear dramatically. It simply stops arriving on its own. Rest becomes functional rather than restorative. Entertainment distracts but does not replenish. Even moments of success feel strangely muted. This fatigue does not ask to be fixed. It asks to be understood. It is not a signal to escape life, but an indication that something essential has been neglected. Often, the neglect is unintentional. There is no conscious choice to disconnect. It happens gradually, through adaptation, through saying yes when something inside is uncertain, through maintaining pace when the inner rhythm asks for pause, through mistaking endurance for alignment. Over time, the distance grows, and with it comes a subtle grief, not for what has been lost, but for something that is still present, yet no longer fully accessed. This is why inner fatigue feels confusing. There is no clear cause to point to. No single moment where everything changed. Only the quiet awareness that life is being lived from the surface inward, rather than from the center outward. This fatigue does not mean something is broken. It means attention has drifted from its source. And when attention drifts long enough, the inner system begins to conserve energy. It withdraws not to punish, but to protect what remains essential. What appears as exhaustion is often the beginning of a deeper recalibration. A signal, not of failure, but of misalignment quietly waiting to be addressed. There is a particular kind of discomfort that arises when actions remain correct, yet something inside resists them. Choices are logical. Behavior is appropriate. Responsibilities are fulfilled. And still, a quiet sense of friction persists. This is not guilt. It is not regret. It is the subtle awareness that movement and meaning are no longer traveling in the same direction. Alignment is rarely lost through dramatic mistakes. More often, it shifts through small, reasonable adaptations. Adjustments made to fit expectations. Compromises made to maintain stability. Habits formed in response to pressure rather than truth. None of these are inherently wrong. But over time, they can pull life away from its inner axis. When alignment is present, effort feels purposeful even when it is demanding. Decisions carry weight without heaviness. There is coherence between intention and action. When alignment begins to fade, the opposite occurs quietly. Effort increases, but fulfillment does not follow. Achievements land without resonance. Movement continues, yet direction feels unclear. This creates confusion because externally, everything appears intact. There is no obvious failure to correct. No crisis demanding intervention. The discomfort comes from a deeper place. Alignment is not about moral correctness or social approval. It is about congruence between inner values, chosen actions, and lived environment. When one of these shifts without the others adjusting, tension forms. Often, the environment changes first. New demands. The inner system adapts to survive within them. At first, adaptation feels responsible, necessary, even wise. But if adaptation continues without recalibration, the inner compass grows quieter. Signals that once guided decisions become harder to hear. Instinctive clarity fades into analysis. Certainty is replaced by constant evaluation. This is when people begin to say, "I don't know what I want anymore." It is not that desire has disappeared. It is that the channel through which desire communicates has been crowded. Noise replaces nuance. Urgency replaces reflection. And alignment becomes difficult to sense. Misalignment does not announce itself dramatically. It shows up as restlessness without cause. As hesitation where confidence once lived. As a persistent sense of being slightly out of place, even in familiar surroundings. The mind often tries to solve this by adding more structure, more goals, more effort, more control. But alignment cannot be forced into existence. It emerges when inner truth and outer life are allowed to converse again. Without that conversation, life becomes increasingly mechanical. Choices are made based on avoidance rather than resonance. Decisions aim to minimize discomfort instead of expressing direction. This is why misalignment feels draining rather than painful. Pain demands attention. Drain erodes slowly. And because the erosion is gradual, it is easy to ignore. Yet the inner system continues to register the discrepancy. It notices when actions are taken without presence. When words are spoken without conviction. When time is spent without meaning. This noticing is not judgment. It is awareness. And awareness is the first signal that alignment is possible again. Misalignment is not a failure of character. It is a signal of evolution. As inner values mature, outer structures must eventually change to match them. If they do not, tension grows. The purpose of this tension is not to punish. It is to invite reorientation. Before any higher guidance can be understood. before any sense of protection or order can be felt. This misalignment must be recognized for what it is. Not a problem to eliminate, but a threshold. A quiet indication that something deeper is asking to be brought back into coherence. There is an order at work that does not announce itself. It does not require belief to function, nor recognition to remain intact. It moves quietly beneath appearances, shaping outcomes long before they are visible. This order is often misunderstood as control, as destiny imposed from outside, as reward and punishment measured by outcomes. But true order does not operate that way. It does not interfere impulsively. It does not rush to correct every imbalance. It allows processes to unfold until understanding becomes possible. Growth, when observed closely, follows patterns. Not rigid formulas, but consistent movements. Expansion followed by contraction. Clarity preceded by uncertainty. Stability earned through disorientation. What feels like disruption is often reorganization. What appears as delay is frequently integration. And what is perceived as loss can be a release from structures that no longer support coherence. This order does not remove challenge. It refines through it. When alignment weakens, life does not immediately collapse. Instead, signals emerge. Fatigue. Subtle invitations to pause and reevaluate. These signals are not punishments. They are feedback. The same intelligence that sustains balance in nature operates within inner life. When a system is pushed beyond its capacity, it compensates. When nourishment is reduced, it conserves. When direction becomes unclear, it slows movement. This intelligence does not judge intention. It responds to structure. If attention is consistently fragmented, clarity diminishes. If values are compromised repeatedly, inner authority weakens. If truth is postponed too often, resonance fades. None of this is moral failure. It is structural consequence. Divine order does not demand perfection. It requires coherence. And coherence is restored not through effort alone, but through alignment between awareness and action. This is why attempts to bypass inner signals rarely succeed. External solutions cannot resolve internal dissonance. Control cannot replace clarity. Order waits. It allows confusion to mature until insight becomes possible. It permits discomfort to persist until orientation shifts. It does not rescue prematurely, because premature rescue interrupts learning. From the surface, this can feel indifferent. But indifference would abandon. Order remains present. It is patient because it is stable. It does not fear delay. It does not hurry transformation. When life begins to feel constrained, when options narrow, when old strategies stop working, this is often interpreted as obstruction. Yet within divine order, constraint serves a purpose. It reduces distraction. It removes excess movement. It concentrates attention. By limiting what no longer fits, order makes space for what must emerge. This process is rarely comfortable, but it is precise. Nothing essential is taken without reason. Nothing necessary is withheld arbitrarily. When something ends, it is because its function has been fulfilled. When something persists, it is because integration is still occurring. Divine order does not explain itself in words. It reveals itself through timing. Moments of clarity arrive when readiness is present. Direction becomes visible when resistance softens. Support is felt when control loosens. This is why forcing answers often leads to further confusion. And why patience, when genuine, restores perception. Order is not something to be accessed. It is something to be recognized. It is already active within the rhythms of thought, emotion, and choice. It becomes noticeable when attention returns inward. Not as belief, not as doctrine, but as an underlying structure that has been steady all along. And within this structure, guidance does not appear as command, but as orientation. A sense of where to stand. A sense of what to hold. A sense of what no longer needs to be carried. This is the ground upon which discernment becomes possible. And it is within this ground that a deeper form of protection can be understood. There are moments when order becomes perceptible, not as an idea, but as a presence. Not dramatic. Simply felt as a steadiness entering where confusion once lingered. This presence does not arrive to persuade. It does not negotiate with doubt. It stands. Across traditions and inner languages, this stabilizing force has been given many names. Yet beyond names, its function remains consistent. It restores structure where boundaries have thinned. It clarifies direction where noise has overtaken discernment. Michael is not introduced as a character stepping onto a stage. There is no proclamation. No declaration of authority. Michael is understood as an embodiment of order made intelligible. A principle that becomes recognizable when inner chaos begins to settle. This presence does not replace human will. It does not intervene to decide. It sharpens perception so choice becomes clear. Where confusion fragments attention, Michael consolidates it. Where fear diffuses energy, Michael concentrates it. Where hesitation blurs truth, Michael defines edges. This is why Michael has long been associated with the sword. Not as a weapon of aggression, but as a symbol of precision. A sword divides what must be separated. Truth from distortion. Intuition from impulse. Signal from noise. The sword does not argue. It cuts cleanly. Alongside the sword stands the shield. Not a barrier against life, but a boundary against intrusion. The shield represents containment. The ability to hold one's ground without attack. The strength to remain intact without becoming rigid. Protection, in this sense, is not control. It is clarity about what enters and what does not. Michael's presence does not eliminate challenge. It prevents unnecessary entanglement. There is a difference between learning through experience and losing energy through misalignment. Michael guards that distinction. Light, often associated with this presence, is not illumination for spectacle. It is visibility. Light reveals what is already present. It does not add meaning. It exposes structure. When light enters a situation, confusion does not always disappear immediately. But ambiguity loses its power to deceive. Michael's protection operates through discernment. Not by removing danger, but by making danger recognizable. This is why the presence of Michael is felt most strongly at moments of choice. Not when outcomes are fixed, but when direction is still fluid. At thresholds. At intersections. At points where decision will shape alignment more than comfort. The presence does not push toward ease. It aligns toward truth. Sometimes this truth confirms a path already taken. Sometimes it requires release. Michael does not soften reality. It clarifies it. This clarity can feel abrupt at first. Edges become visible where there was once fog. Boundaries appear where compromise had blurred them. What remains is not harsher. It is cleaner. Protection here is not about preventing pain. It is about preventing distortion. When inner signals are clear, manipulation loses its grip. When boundaries are defined, intrusion becomes obvious. When values are intact, temptation reveals its cost. Michael's presence strengthens the inner axis. The place where decision and integrity meet. This axis does not dictate behavior. It stabilizes orientation. From this stability, movement becomes deliberate. Action carries weight without force. Silence holds meaning without withdrawal. Michael does not speak in sentences. The presence communicates through coherence. Through the sense of standing firmly within one's own field. Through the absence of internal conflict when a choice aligns with truth. Through the calm that follows a clear decision, even when the decision is difficult. This is why Michael's protection is subtle. It does not announce itself as safety. It feels like alignment. And alignment, once restored, becomes its own defense. Discernment is often confused with caution. Fear is often mistaken for intuition. Both can slow movement. Both can signal hesitation. But their origins are different, and so are their outcomes. Fear contracts. It narrows perception. It rushes the mind toward avoidance or control. Discernment clarifies. It sharpens attention. It creates space for choice without urgency. At first glance, they can feel similar. Both may say, stop. Both may interrupt momentum. The difference lies in what follows. Fear demands immediate resolution. It insists that something must be done quickly to relieve discomfort. It frames options as threats rather than possibilities. Discernment does not hurry. It observes. It waits until information settles into coherence. Fear speaks in absolutes. Always. Never. Too late. Too risky. Its language is rigid because its function is protection through restriction. Discernment speaks through proportion. It weighs context. It recognizes degrees rather than extremes. This distinction matters most at moments of transition. When a path begins to shift, fear amplifies uncertainty. It imagines consequences before understanding direction. It projects loss where only change is present. Discernment, by contrast, notices alignment. It senses whether movement expands integrity or dilutes it. It asks not what might go wrong, but what is true here. Fear pulls attention outward. It scans for danger, judgment, rejection. It measures safety by external approval or immediate relief. Discernment draws attention inward. It references inner values. It evaluates consistency between intention and action. This is why fear often feels loud. It competes for attention. It repeats itself to maintain influence. Discernment is quiet. It does not need repetition. Once seen, it remains steady. The challenge is that fear arrives faster. It is conditioned by experience, memory, and habit. It reacts before understanding can form. Discernment develops more slowly. It requires presence. It strengthens through reflection rather than reaction. Many assume that hesitation is evidence of fear. But hesitation can also signal discernment at work. The pause that follows fear is tense. The pause that follows discernment is clear. Fear leaves residue. Even when avoided, it lingers as doubt or regret. Discernment leaves resolution. Even when outcomes are difficult, inner conflict reduces. Another distinction appears in how each relates to boundaries. Fear builds walls to prevent exposure. It isolates to avoid vulnerability. It says no to everything unfamiliar. Discernment establishes boundaries to preserve integrity. It allows engagement without entanglement. It says no selectively, and yes with intention. Fear asks, how do I protect myself? Discernment asks, what must be protected? Fear seeks certainty before moving. Discernment moves once clarity is sufficient. This clarity does not promise comfort. It promises coherence. When discernment is active, decisions feel clean. There is less internal debate. Less justification required. Even difficult choices carry a sense of rightness. Not because they are easy, but because they align. This is where the presence of Michael becomes most functional. Not as intervention, but as reinforcement of discernment. The stabilizing force associated with Michael strengthens the capacity to distinguish. It supports clarity without pressure. It holds boundaries without aggression. Through this support, fear loses authority. Not by being silenced, but by being recognized. Fear is seen as information, not instruction. Discernment determines response. When this distinction becomes embodied rather than conceptual, choices begin to reflect inner order rather than external demand. Movement becomes deliberate, pauses become purposeful, and direction emerges without force. This is not mastery over fear. It is orientation toward truth. And truth, once perceived, does not need urgency to be followed. Not all pressure arrives as conflict. Some of it settles gently, almost politely, into daily life. It does not announce itself as threat. It presents itself as normal. These pressures accumulate through environment, rhythm, and repetition. Through constant exposure rather than sudden impact. They shape inner states without asking for attention. Over time, energy diminishes not because of one wrong choice, but because of many small misalignments sustained without pause. Certain environments thin awareness. They reward reaction over reflection. They normalize urgency and diminish depth. When attention is repeatedly pulled outward, the inner field becomes porous. Energy leaks through unexamined demands, expectations, and habits. This is not invasion. It is erosion. Relationships can also exert invisible pressure. Not through harm, but through subtle imbalance. When one adapts constantly while another remains unchanged, when presence is given without replenishment, fatigue accumulates quietly. These pressures do not require malice to be effective. They operate through repetition, through unchallenged patterns. Even information itself can become a source of depletion. Constant input fragments focus. Excessive stimulation disrupts integration. The inner system responds by conserving. Clarity dims. Motivation weakens. Discernment becomes harder to access. Protection, in this context, is often misunderstood. It is not about shielding oneself from life. It is about preserving coherence within it. The protective aspect associated with Michael does not confront pressure directly. It stabilizes the inner field, so pressure loses leverage. This protection functions through containment, through strengthening boundaries that were never meant to be rigid, only defined. When boundaries are clear, energy remains where it belongs. Influence is recognized without being absorbed. Michael's presence here is not dramatic. It does not block experience. It clarifies what requires engagement and what does not. This clarity reduces unnecessary expenditure of attention. It restores economy to inner life. Protection also operates through alignment of habits. When daily rhythms support inner truth, pressure weakens naturally. Rest becomes restorative again. Silence regains value. Focus stabilizes. Invisible pressures rely on unconscious participation. They persist when unexamined. They fade when recognized. Recognition does not require confrontation. It requires awareness. As awareness strengthens, choices adjust organically. Time is allocated differently. Attention is guarded without effort. The protective field associated with Michael amplifies this process. It reinforces discernment so boundaries feel natural rather than defensive. When inner coherence returns, pressure does not disappear. It simply no longer dominates. The world remains complex. Demands continue. But the inner axis holds. From this axis, interaction becomes selective. Engagement becomes intentional. Withdrawal becomes conscious rather than reactive. Protection, then, is not something added. It is something restored. A return to the capacity to remain intact within movement, to participate without depletion, to stand present without being scattered. This form of protection is quiet because it is structural. It does not announce safety. It creates stability. And within stability, clarity regains strength. There comes a point when understanding is no longer enough. Insight has accumulated. Patterns have been recognized. The structure is visible. And still, nothing changes until a choice is made. This turning point is rarely dramatic. There is no external signal marking its arrival. No announcement that something significant is about to occur. It arrives quietly, as a question that can no longer be avoided. Not a question about circumstances, but about responsibility. At this point, it becomes clear that clarity cannot act on one's behalf. Protection cannot decide. Order does not impose direction. All of these prepare the ground. The movement itself must be chosen. This realization often brings a subtle discomfort. Not fear, but exposure. The recognition that no one else is meant to carry this decision. Blame loses usefulness here. So does waiting. The inner turning point does not ask for certainty. It asks for sincerity. It is the moment when alignment is valued more than comfort. When integrity matters more than outcome. When staying the same begins to feel heavier than changing. This is not about choosing what is right in a moral sense. It is about choosing what is true. Truth at this level is rarely abstract. It is felt as resonance or resistance, as expansion or contraction. The turning point is recognized when avoidance becomes conscious, when hesitation is seen clearly rather than justified, when delay is acknowledged as a choice in itself. Nothing external forces resolution. The pressure is internal, but gentle. There is space to step forward. There is also space to step away. Both are possible. What shifts is awareness. From this awareness, neutrality dissolves. Indecision reveals its cost. And clarity, once present, begins to ask for embodiment. This is where the inner axis asserts itself. Not with demand, but with presence. Standing in alignment does not require certainty about results. It requires coherence between recognition and action. The choice may be small, a boundary clarified, a truth acknowledged, an old pattern released. Its significance lies not in scale, but in direction. Once the turning point is crossed, there is often a sense of quiet resolve. Not excitement, not relief, stability. Even before circumstances respond, inner conflict reduces. Energy consolidates. This is not because everything has improved, but because fragmentation has decreased. The presence associated with Michael supports this moment not by pushing, but by holding structure steady. Discernment remains active. Fear may still speak, but it no longer decides. From here, alignment begins to express itself through action. Not as reaction, but as choice. This turning point does not guarantee ease. It guarantees integrity. And integrity, once chosen, becomes a reference point that cannot be forgotten. Alignment is not sustained by insight alone. Understanding reveals direction, but practice stabilizes it. Without embodiment, clarity fades back into concept. Practical alignment does not require complex systems or rituals. It begins with attention returning to what is already present, with small, consistent actions that reinforce inner coherence. The first practice is observation. Not analysis. Not judgment. Simply noticing. Noticing reactions before responding. Noticing where energy increases and where it diminishes. Noticing which environments restore presence and which quietly drain it. Observation interrupts automatic patterns. It creates a pause between stimulus and response. Within that pause, discernment becomes available. The second practice is release. Release does not mean rejection. It means letting go of what no longer needs to be carried. This may involve stepping back from dynamics that require constant justification, reducing exposure to noise that fragments focus, allowing certain expectations to fall away without explanation. Release is not withdrawal from life. It is recalibration of engagement. When unnecessary weight is set down, energy returns naturally. The third practice is reinforcement of the inner axis. This axis is strengthened by consistency between values and behavior. By choosing actions that reflect inner truth, even when they are small. Alignment grows when decisions are made with awareness rather than urgency. When boundaries are honored without defensiveness. When silence is allowed without guilt. These practices do not aim to control outcomes. They aim to stabilize orientation. Over time, this stability becomes noticeable. Choices require less deliberation. Conflicting impulses lose intensity. Life does not become simpler, but engagement becomes clearer. Practical alignment also involves rhythm. Rest is taken before depletion. Movement follows readiness rather than pressure. Attention is given space to integrate rather than being continuously consumed. None of this requires perfection. Inconsistency does not undo alignment. Awareness restores it. The role of the protective presence associated with Michael here is subtle. It reinforces clarity through structure. It supports boundaries through steadiness rather than force. This support is felt as increased confidence in discernment, as reduced tolerance for misalignment, as a growing ease in saying no without explanation. Practical alignment does not change who one is. It removes what obscures. As the inner axis strengthens, life begins to reorganize naturally around it. Not dramatically, not instantly, but steadily. And steadiness is enough. What unfolds from alignment is rarely loud. It does not arrive with certainty about the future, nor does it announce conclusions. It settles instead as a sense of order returning. Not an order imposed from outside, but one remembered from within. This order does not remove uncertainty. It changes the relationship to it. Questions may still arise. Outcomes may remain unknown. But the inner axis holds steady. From that steadiness, movement becomes quieter, less reactive, more deliberate. There is no need to rush forward. No need to retreat. Only the awareness of standing where coherence is present. This is not the end of a process. It is the restoration of orientation. When orientation is clear, direction emerges naturally. Not as urgency, but as readiness. The sense of being alone often softens here. Not because everything is understood, but because inner fragmentation has reduced. There is a recognition that support does not always appear as intervention. Sometimes it appears as clarity. Sometimes as restraint. Sometimes as the ability to remain still without discomfort. The protection associated with Michael remains quiet. It does not shield from life. It supports integrity within it. This support does not promise ease. It offers coherence. And coherence changes how difficulty is met. From here, choices continue. Challenges persist. But they are approached from alignment rather than confusion. Nothing needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be proven. The path forward does not require certainty about destination. Only honesty about direction. This is the quiet promise. Not that everything will unfold as desired, but that alignment restores the capacity to meet what unfolds without losing oneself. Those who continue walking this path do so not because they are free from doubt, but because they have learned to listen beneath it. And listening, once reclaimed, becomes its own form of guidance.